back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone.
And welcome back to The Law Show on CL 650. We're talking about personal injury, really mostly about ICBC and accident victims. People have to deal with ICBC. It's a terrible time, first of all, being in an accident, then having to deal with all of the things you don't know. It's the old saying, you don't know what you don't know, and that's why you have people that can represent you. Kevin Hyde, partner at McQuarrie LLP, and Perry Armitage is here as well from McQuarrie LLP. Now, Perry, before the break, we were talking a little bit about Facebook, right? Yeah. And so you have a case that Facebook had an effect on, or rather?
Yeah, no, I was speaking about a case that went to trial a few years ago. It wasn't my case, but it was a decision that I had read. A young lady had some multiple soft tissue injuries, and the gist of the case was basically that the evidence at trial was that the injuries had a devastating effect on her life. She was housebound, for the most part bedridden, wasn't engaging with family and friends as she had in the past. Was a recluse, had cut herself off from, most of activities that she had enjoyed previously. And then at trial, the Facebook photos came out, and there she was, horseback riding, bungee jumping, traveling, in the clubs with her friends, partying, and it told a completely different story. And the judge elected to dismiss her case, gave her 0, and simply because she lacked any credibility whatsoever. So I tell clients right from the beginning to be very cautious about social media. Certainly they should never be posting any information about the accident specifically, but also be really cautious about, the way you portray yourself and what sort of activities you show the world for you to be doing. The other thing I tell clients is don't let your injury claim rule your life. You still have to live your life. The key, though, is you have to be honest about the things you can and cannot do. So if you post a picture of you horseback riding, you better not show up at an examination for discovery saying you can no longer ride a horse. It can't hurt you if you're honest about it, even if the photos show you doing the activity. I mean, it will say something about your level of disability, of course, but the worst thing that can happen is if you've undermined your own credibility by telling one story when the pictures tell a completely different story.
And sometimes it could just be an innocent, you might be next to a horse, but you're not riding the horse. Right?
Or somebody could tag you in a photo that you're unaware of. Maybe, so you have to sort of monitor your own timelines, I guess, or your own,
check those privacy settings.
Yeah. I don't even realize how they all work, to be honest with you.
Well, and as far as privacy settings are concerned, I know there was a decision a couple of years back where a lawyer found out that there were privacy settings in place to prevent certain posts on social media from being discovered, and they got a court order having those privacy settings removed, and the plaintiff was basically forced to disclose all of the information, regardless of what was public, what was private. So
the best thing is not to put it on at all.
And so what I tell people is, before you hit post on that post, ask yourself the question: what will ICBC make of this when they see it?
Because it could be, just like you said, Zach, an innocent photo of someone standing next to a horse. Well, ICBC will be looking, because that's their job, looking for anything to latch on to.
Yeah, well, you went
horseback riding, and this photo is dated 3 weeks after the accident. So you got to be careful.
All right, so we touched on it earlier, Kevin. You can talk to it, that the relief that a lot of people have when you take over their file, that they don't have to deal with the big machine anymore, right? And sort of talk to us about what you limit. We talked about the privacy settings. It's kind of like a privacy setting that you enact, that they're not allowed to look at certain aspects of your life, right?
Exactly. As you were saying, for many people, it's interesting in the first meeting. That's the first thing they seem relieved about. Not that we're going to build your claim, get the expert reports for you, and even the playing field with ICBC. by paying all your disbursements and sending you where you need to be and seeing who you need to see. They're more excited the fact that, hey, I don't have to talk to an ICBC adjuster anymore. That's your problem. And that's one of the reasons here. Everyone says, oh, these lawyers, and they're taking a big percentage of these fees. Well, A, almost all the time we're going to get you more. And B, we take all of that stress off of you now. In dealing with ICBC, and that's our stress now. So that client can just concentrate on getting better, getting proper treatment, and worrying about their recovery.
Now, so the person might be saying, well, I'm getting calls from them 2-3 times a week. Once they find out a lawyer's involved, that drops dramatically, I'm sure.
Once they receive
to you,
that,
right?
Exactly. Once they receive that initial letter that they're retained, ICBC receives it, they can only go through us.
No, but I mean, to you, the calls must drop as well. Once they realize there's a lawyer involved, they're not calling you all the time.
Oh, no, they know that we know what we're doing, and we're going to obviously take all the proper steps necessary and not be in any rush to settle a file, as you mentioned before, some firms are. We wait until the proper time to settle that file. And going back to what you were asking about with regards to the document disclosure, well, when you're unrepresented, ICBC, as I said, is paying for some of your treatment under your Part 7s, which you're entitled to whether you're at fault or not, repairing your vehicle. And then they're putting authorizations in front of you to sign so they can take a peek at not only your clinical records since the motor vehicle accident, but they're looking back in time at all these clinical records of yours that should be private, that might not be relevant at all.
Well, how do they
a lawyer
get them?
Wouldn't allow that to happen.
How do they get them? How do they access them? Because
once you sign that authorization, they can use that authorization and they can send it to your physiotherapist, your family doctor, or anyone else who's been treating you, your psychologist, your counselor.
So you provide them the information that's relevant to your case, not everything else.
The lawyer will go through, and if they've found that it's relevant, we can make that determination. That often occurs after an examination for discovery, where they've asked you broad questions under oath. They don't automatically get your records going back to your date of birth. They have to show that it's relevant to the actual motor vehicle accident case. If you weren't getting treatment you had no pre-existing injuries and weren't getting treatment in the 2 years prior, well, they're not going to get any records prior to that accident. But if something does come up and you had some chiropractic or physiotherapy treatment, or maybe saw a registered massage therapist is using up your benefits before, the end of the year, that might be relevant.
Well, one of the things we've talked about in the past, Kevin, is that your clients sometimes are reluctant to share some medical information because they think it might hurt their case. But you've explained that actually it helps establish a baseline for your health before the accident.
Exactly. We have a baseline to work from, and that expert can say, well, this is how it was before. They were coming in for regular maintenance, and then after the accident, we're dealing with a whole different injury here. This is much more serious, and this is where we're at. And they can make that comparison, and we can get those records that show that, or if necessary, order a report from whoever was treating you, whether that's a chiro, a physio, or the family doctor that can establish that. And the reality is, if two people are in an accident and one person is more susceptible to injury than the other, because of pre-existing conditions that weren't even symptomatic at the time and the accident made them symptomatic, that at law is called thin skull rule. And basically you take your plane of how you find them. And if they're injured as a result of that accident, those symptoms are a result of the accident, ICBC is not off the hook. They have to pay and compensate you for that.
So you have two people that are in a similar accident, and one a couple of weeks later, a few aches and pains, and they're back to normal. But other people are affected differently, and there have been some cases, sort of precedent-setting cases that so somebody doesn't look injured, but they are traumatically affected by this accident. So kind of explain that, because some people are more. They just have different symptoms, right?
Everybody's made up differently. Everybody has sort of a different level of vulnerability, different psychological makeup. I know, for example, that what I call 9 out of 10 pain. My wife looks at me and says, "Well, for me, that would be a 2."
That's what most women would say.
We don't know true pain, do we?
No.
So there's maybe a bit of a wimp factor for me. And that may be true with a lot of people. They have different thresholds for pain and dysfunction, and that has to be factored in.
And their ability to mentally cope with that pain. Some people can just push through it and say, I'll just get on with my day. Other people, it incapacitates them, right?
Yeah, and I just want to touch on one thing that I've noticed in my practice, which is becoming more and more prevalent. and particularly in cases involving people who've had multiple accidents. There seems to be, it's when we look at the traffic issues in the Lower Mainland, and the difficulty with people, distracted driving issues, and so on. I think the Lower Mainland is ripe for this sort of problem. We're seeing people in accidents that go on to suffer psychological injury, where they have some sort of a anxiety disorder or full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder over, driving in traffic.
And that affects their commute every day.
It can affect every aspect of their life. I had a case several years ago where a mother and her son were going through a green light at an intersection, and they were T-boned by a vehicle. It was actually a police officer who was, looking at something on his screen. There was no emergency he was attending. He was distracted, and he hit them at high speed, and the vehicle was spun around 360 degrees. He was quite badly hurt at the scene of the accident, had to be loaded onto a stretcher and taken away by ambulance. And the effect that it had on his mother was quite profound. She was unable to drive as a passenger or ride as a passenger in a vehicle almost from that point onward. It almost ended her marriage because her husband, who would drive her around to different things, found her to be almost impossible to be in the vehicle with as a passenger.
Reactive.
She was reactive. They would get into the huge fights and these huge blowouts, and he just couldn't understand why this was still an issue. And
so how do you get compensation for that?
Well, we had her see a psychologist who diagnosed the issue as PTSD. And there's a number of criteria that fit the diagnosis that she matched. Her physical injuries were an issue, but the main issue was really the psychological injuries. And we were able to get a fair settlement for her. So, and I'm seeing this more and more. People, let's say they're in an accident in the evening when it's raining heavily on a highway, and now that's a situation they just cannot cope with. They can't drive in that sort of a situation any longer.
And we certainly get a lot of rain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that would affect your life for sure. Quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about, maybe you're being represented by one law firm or lawyer. Can you switch partway through? And a little bit about hit and run as well. Next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.